Hey, back in the basement again today, Brandon here, gonna walk you through an SBD day, as well as kind of share some insights with you. So I just got done warming up, and for me, that's just the Peloton for 5 minutes. I ride it on every single training day before I actually start lifting. I also ride it on every day I'm not lifting, so I'm on like an 80-day ride streak. Those days that I'm not lifting, I tend to do longer rides of 10, 20, or 30 minutes, depending on certain situations. And I'll share all that in a video at some point, but I've been liking it a lot, as obvious by my 80-day ride streak since I got it, as well as my training continuing to progress. So working that in and still enjoying that while still not impeding my actual training. Now, some exciting news that I want to share with you guys is that I'm consulting on a barbell. So a company approached me and said, hey, how would you like to design your own bar and we'll make it? And I said, that could be pretty sweet, assuming we get everything right. So we're going back and forth on some of the specs. And if you follow me on Instagram, I've been asking for your opinions too, because there are certain things that I like that I would like to see, but I still want to hear your thoughts and your input. So in this video, I'm going to share some of those things and some of the decisions I'm leaning towards, but I'd love to get your insight as well, because even though I have my preferences, I know you guys don't always share my same view, like on 35-pound plates, for instance. So before we get too into that, let's get to the first thing for today, which is actually deadlift. So it's actually a DBS day. So it's deadlifts, bench, and then squats, and I'll bring you along for the ride and share some insights on this barbell, and hopefully you can help me with some insight as well. All right, so top set 555 for 3. I rated it at an 8, and it felt pretty good. The first rep felt a little bit slow. Second and third reps felt really smooth, really good, which tells me I need to work on my starting position for my first rep, because that's gonna come around and bite me in the butt come 1 rep max testing time. Now, because I rated that 555 at an 8, the app is giving me a 4x3 back off with 515, and that may adjust a little bit depending on how I rate those back offs over the course of those 4 sets. But I just did 1 set and it felt pretty good overall. But today is a long training day, right? Deadlift, benching, squatting. It's about 1 p.m. in the afternoon right now. I haven't eaten since 7:30 this morning, so I'm hungry. But I don't like to eat pre-workout, and plus I'm working. I do this during my lunch breaks. I don't have a ton of free time as it is because I gotta fit in training, and in this case, make a video today. So one of the things I'm doing is actually doing an intra workout drink right now. And these are just these Koya protein drinks. These are plant-based proteins. I've partnered up with them to sponsor a couple of these videos. I showed you the vanilla bean last time. This is the cinnamon horchata. But really good macros on these, like 18 grams of protein, 13 grams of carbs, 7 grams of fat, only 4 grams of sugar. They're non-GMO, they're dairy-free, they're soy-free, and they pretty much fit any diet. In fact, they even have keto-friendly versions. I mentioned the vanilla bean, I mentioned the cinnamon horchata. I've also had like their coffee flavored ones, their cookies and cream flavored ones. So there's a lot of different flavors out there. And you can actually save 20% off of anything you get from them if you use the link in the description box below. But I'm appreciative of them because these things are really tasty and they make a great intra-workout snack until I can finish up these longer training days and then actually eat my lunch while I scurry back to work to not miss too much time. Now, getting back to the main point of this video, besides the training, is the barbell. And before I get into what I want your feedback on, I want to talk about some non-negotiables. Number one, the length of the bar is going to be a little bit over 86.5 inches. That's just standard. There's no way out of that. I mean, you could go shorter, but what's the point? You can go longer, but then you're looking at creating more whip potentially, or having to go with a thicker diameter because of the length of the bar is increased. So we do want to kind of aim for a power bar, which is going to be 86.5 inches, just a little bit over more than likely. Now, speaking of diameter, my preference is a 29 millimeter bar, and that's kind of a non-negotiable here. You could go 28.5, like maybe the Texas Power Bar or the Elite FTS Power Bar, but I really would like a stiffer bar overall, so I want to go to the max diameter that a power bar really allows for, and that's 29 millimeters. So 29 millimeters, 86.5 inches, give or take a little bit of space on there. Those are non-negotiable. Let's get to bench, and we can talk about some of the things that I would like your feedback on. All right, so just finished a 3x3 with bench, and I ended up with a top set of 270 for 3, which I actually rated it like a 6.5. That was my last set and actually felt my best also. So I'm really pumped on that. Bench has been going really well. I have as wide a grip as I can do, so my index fingers are on the rings and things are just feeling really good right now, which I'm stoked about. Now I'm also supersetting that in with pause squats, which I'll show you in just a second. I'm still working up. I have 5 sets of that, which in theory sucks, but in reality, I've really been liking all this volume I've been doing. So let's talk about the first issue with the barbell that I want your feedback on, and that is the collar width. So I've already mentioned the Texas Power Bar before. I said my main issue with that was that it was 28.5 millimeters, which isn't necessarily a deal breaker, but when you combine that with how thick those collars are, it tends to add more whip to the bar. So that's kind of the thicker end of collars that you'll see. Now on the opposite end of the spectrum, you have a competition style bar with extremely thin collars, which makes the bar super stiff, which in theory is really good. In practicality for training, I don't find to be super beneficial for a lot of people, because if you have like a rogue rack or you just don't have a good walkout on squats, you're going to find that you're going to be banging the upright a lot. Now, obviously they make things that can help with that, like the roller J cups that I've talked about in the past, or just cleaning up your squat in general. It's a no cost option, but I just find for training purposes, not a lot of people like those actual competition collars, unless you're like a high level competitor in the IPF, in which case it might make the most sense. Now, I think the compromise for some would probably be something similar to like an Ohio Power Bar, which is like 1 inch and 3/16 for width. But personally, I find that my preference lies somewhere like the Kabuki Power Bar, or even the new Strength Co Power Bar that I recently got in that is right at 1 inch. So it's still thinner than most bars out there in terms of width, but gives you a little bit of a buffer enough where you're not going to be banging into the uprights as much. So for me, for this bar, I think 1 inch collars are the way to go, but I would really appreciate some of your feedback on this in the comment section below. All right, so just finished up squats, total of 5 sets, started with 415, and my last set was actually 455. And it's really interesting because they all felt the same regardless of the weight going up, and it's kind of like that scene in Unbreakable with Bruce Willis, where they keep adding numbers to his bench and it moves the same, but he can keep doing more and they just keep adding more weight.
How much is it, Dad?
About 350 pounds.
That's what I felt like. I was like in the zone, which for me is a huge win considering I just did heavy deadlifts and I've been supersetting these squats in with bench. That's awesome for me. I will take it. Now, next thing I want to talk about on the bar is the knurling itself, and part of me wants to go super aggressive and super sharp, but I realize for training purposes, that's not ideal. I know even for some of the sharper bars I own, I tend to save those for lower rep work where there's not a lot of volume, because even though I have what I would consider thick skin, I don't want to tear up my back or my hands on high rep or a lot of volume style work. So what I'm thinking on this is still have an aggressive cut knurl, so 1.5 millimeters of depth, similar to what you'd find on a Alico powerlifting bar for competition. But instead of going straight peak design like you might find on the Kabuki Power Bar, kind of going more towards something you'd find on the Rep Power Bar EX, which is still that peak design with just the tippy tops of those mountains chopped off, so it gives you a little bit of grip. Nothing as severe as, let's say, a Rogue Ohio Power Bar, which again is a deep cut aggressive bar in that regard, but those volcanoes are pretty deep, meaning that it's super grippy, which is awesome, but lacks the bite that some people are looking for. So I think in this regard, we're looking at somewhat of a peak design with just the tippy tops cut off, and I think that's going to give a great grip overall. But again, would be interested to hear your comments in the comment section below. All right, so on to accessories. The first thing I'm gonna do is a posterior chain thing, and normally I do glute ham raises, but as you can see from the clip, it's not in my basement anymore. I sold it last week. I have the replacement on the way. It actually should have been here already, so maybe it was a bit premature on my part. Not the first time, of course. And I'll make a video and Instagram post when I actually get that new replacement in. But speaking of knurling on the bar, the other thing I want to talk about with it is the center knurl. I'm a big fan of it. And typically what I found on a lot of power bars, while it's sufficient, it's not long enough for my standards. Case could be made for that of a lot of things in my life. But what I find is when a lot of people get tight in a squat and pinch their shoulder blades and retract their scapulas, The place where the center knurl is tends to be elevated just a little bit and it doesn't grab your back as good as it possibly could, which is the big reason I'm a fan of squat bars with a fully knurled shaft. Now, obviously on a power bar, that doesn't make as much sense to do that, especially when people are deadlifting, because you could potentially eat up your shins if you have an aggressive knurled bar like this bar should be. But what I'm still looking at is a longer center knurl portion, similar to what I have on the Lujanju Mastery Power Bar. So about 5 inches, which is give or take an inch or so bigger than what you'll find on a Rogue Ohio Power Bar. But again, would love to hear your feedback on what you prefer for center knurl length. All right, so some other accessories that I'm doing is a quad exercise. In this case, I'm just doing some elevated split squats. I'm using a kettlebell just for some weight and some balance. To be honest, I don't put a lot of effort necessarily into this accessory work. I've done a lot of my main work already. The accessory work is just to keep moving and hit some things while not necessarily killing myself with it. So tend to be lighter or some body weight exercises in this case, especially on these longer days. That way I can superset in all of my accessory work together and be done sooner, because squatting, benching, and deadlifting can take up a lot of time. Now, moving on to the bar again, I've been talking a lot about feel, about knurl, and one of the things that's going to be a really key component of this bar is the end finish. So for me, the shaft, that means it's probably going to be bare steel or stainless for the most part. And I think given the choice, if I'm designing a bar, I would want a stainless steel bar, because that's going to offer the best resistance as well as one of the best feels out there. Now, the argument could be made to go bare steel to keep costs down, but that's not what I'm looking to do. I'm not making a cheap bar necessarily. I would like a nice bar, and for me, that's going to be stainless steel shaft. Now, to be honest, I did give some consideration to black oxide, and the reason I did that is because I found on my Kabuki Duffalo bar that I recently got in black oxide is that it is still a finish that offers some resistance while not taking away from the feel of the knurl. So it's still a very sharp and great feeling bar. It would keep the cost down some, but the problem is that finish isn't going to last over time, especially on things like the sleeves. It's going to rub off, and on the collar and shaft, you'll find that over time it's going to fade and be non-existent. And stainless steel isn't that much more expensive than black oxide, so I think stainless makes the most sense, at least for the shaft. And I say that because I've had some discussion with people around the sleeves themselves. Should it be stainless? And in my opinion, the answer is no. While ideally that's a great thing, I find it's not going to take away too much. I have stainless steel bars now with bare steel sleeves, and they've held up phenomenally well. And the sleeves are going to get beat up and nicked up anyways because the weights are coming on and off. And I'm just more concerned with having rust and corrosion on the knurl or parts of the bar that you're going to be touching, which is why I don't think it makes sense to have stainless steel sleeves, especially when you take a look at the cost that it adds on. You're talking about almost increasing the cost of a bar by 20% just for sleeves, which doesn't really add a ton of functionality in my opinion. So my ideal bar in this case is going to be a stainless shaft with actually chrome sleeves. I think chrome still gives that look that it's going to, match with the shaft itself, but it will still offer some corrosion resistance if that's what you're worried about, for a minimal add-on cost. But of course, let me know in the comment section below what you think about that. All right, so some ab work also to be supersetting in. So supersetting in the banded good mornings, the split leg squats, and the ab work. And truth be told, in the past, I'd probably just skip the ab work. I've really been trying to stick to the training as prescribed with the Juggernaut AI, and I really think it's paying off, as evident by how I've been talking about how my training's been going. Now, talking about the bar in general, again, if we're doing stainless, what I told the company is it has to come in at under $400. That's kind of like the magic price point, especially if it's not something that's a well-known brand necessarily. Now, I am trying to work with them on the pricing too, to offer some sort of discount code or whatever for people that watch these videos to knock that price down even further. That's still kind of to be determined, as is some of the other specs on the bar. And again, that's why I'm asking for your input. I believe one of the things they're going to do is send me a barbell that basically has a bunch of different types of knurl cut on it, which will be pretty cool, because the big consideration on this is it has to meet the specs, right? It's one thing to put it together on paper, only to get it in and notice that the knurl is inconsistent. It's not as sharp as you thought it was going to be. Some of the finer things just aren't where they should. And I don't want to attach my name or consulting even to something if it doesn't meet what I want it to be. So it's going to be an interesting process regardless, and I'd really like to bring you guys along. I'm really going to lean on you for some input. So anything you have, again, leave it in the comment section below. But I'm going to finish up the rest of these accessories and call it a day, because I need that lunch, where training time is right at about an hour and a half, which is a little bit extended because I've been taking time to film these little cuts in between. But good training session overall. And again, I'd appreciate your feedback. In the meantime, as always, thanks for watching, and stay big.